He had no name, no rank, no badge, just a sword and a past the kingdom wanted buried. They called him Nameless #1, the church's most dangerous secret. But when a cardinal sent him to live as an ordinary student, the academy had no idea what had just walked through its gates. So, what happens when the strongest knight in the kingdom pretends to be the weakest student in the school? A lone silhouette stood among the wreckage of a battlefield, surrounded by debris and fallen soldiers. A dragon-like creature muttered in disbelief that a single person had wiped out its entire unit. Elsewhere, a group of students in school uniforms gathered together, one of them looking serious as someone demanded to know what he really was. The scene shifted to a ruined village with broken windows. The young man walked toward an entrance and gazed down a stairway leading into darkness. He confirmed the location and descended into the underground of an abandoned church. As he moved through the dimly lit corridor, a menacing voice echoed around him, mocking whoever had dared to disturb his research. The interior revealed itself to be a decrepit church, corpses hanging from the walls. The protagonist confronted a sinister, pale-faced figure and asked if he was the necromancer, Gnome, the dead spirit king. Gnome studied the young man and noticed he carried no dragon chapter badge, mocking him for being a low-ranked nobody. Gnome taunted him further, boasting that he had killed knights who held the gold dragon chapter, the highest rank reserved for the kingdom's 10 strongest. He sneered that he had lost count of how many knights he had slain over the decades. Moving closer, Gnome guessed the protagonist had only stumbled upon this place during a routine investigation. He warned the young man that his luck had just run out. The protagonist struck first, launching an attack. Gnome dodged and summoned mystical symbols in the air, declaring he had a present from the land of the dead. An enormous undead dragon crashed down through the rubble. The beast was massive, a reanimated corpse of a dragon noble that had once lived for over 1,000 years. Gnome promised the protagonist an eternity of suffering, trapped inside the undead dragon's body. But the protagonist stood calm, unflinching, and ready to fight. Gnome questioned whether this boy actually intended to challenge his creation. The dark aura surrounding the protagonist surged far beyond anything a normal human could produce. He stood with his sword drawn while the massive undead dragon towered behind him, yet he showed no fear at all. He channeled the Gangma technique, flooding his body with black mana to push his strength past its limits. Then he moved. In a single devastating strike, he cut clean through the undead dragon, shattering the creature's body to pieces. His expression stayed calm and focused the entire time. Gnome could not comprehend the speed and power he had just witnessed. Gnome's disbelief turned to horror as he realized what the protagonist was. He demanded to know if the boy was one of the Phantom Dragon Knights, the kingdom's secret weapons that were never supposed to exist. The protagonist confirmed it. He told Gnome that he had no real name. He was simply called Nameless #1. But there was another name, Ain, the one he had been called before. With that, he struck Gnome down and beheaded him, ending the necromancer for good. But Gnome's final words lingered. Before dying, he had taunted Ain about living an empty life with no name, no love, and no glory. He called him nothing more than a hollow weapon who would die without ever knowing what it meant to be human. Those words cut deeper than any blade. Ain walked alone through a quiet forest, lost in thought. He couldn't shake what Gnome had said. For the first time, he found himself questioning the emptiness of his existence, wondering if there was something more to life beyond being a weapon. A quiet unease settled over him, and the seeds of change had been planted. That unease followed him. He found himself sitting beneath a tree, staring at nothing, still unable to shake Gnome's words. The feeling had not faded. If anything, it had grown. He wondered if this was what it meant to be afraid, not of an enemy, but of the emptiness inside himself. Eventually, he made his way back to the Adia Kingdom, Holy City Sane. Inside the Grand Cathedral, decorated with chandeliers and stained glass, Cardinal Nedia stood at the altar. Ein knelt before a large man and reported that his mission was complete. But the large man's form crumbled to dust, a disguise disguise made through alchemy, revealing Cardinal Nedia's true appearance, a beautiful woman with long black hair and mismatched red and blue eyes. She welcomed him warmly, calling him her dear child. They discussed the end of the necromancer Gnome, the dead spirit king. Nydia dismissed the need for a formal report, saying there was nothing in the kingdom that could surpass her creations. She had been ruling from the shadows for centuries, controlling the royal family and the church under countless identities. She was an alchemist and a witch who had lived for over 200 years. It was she who had taken Ain and other church orphans and turned them into phantom dragon knights using forbidden magic. Ain struggled with what he was feeling. He had been made without emotion, shaped into a weapon, but now he questioned whether he could ever know happiness as a human being. Nydia noticed something was off and pressed him on it, telling him she truly cared about him. Hesitantly, he admitted that he wanted to enroll in an academy. He confessed that Gnome's dying words had gotten under his skin, the mocking about living an empty life with no name, no love, and no glory. On his way back from the mission, he had seen students around his age living normal lives, and for the first time, he felt envious. He recognized that this was the first real emotion he had ever experienced, and it left him wanting to live as a human being. Nydia responded with a hint of surprise and a slightly mocking tone, as if the idea of her weapon wanting a normal life amused her. Ain wrestled with doubt, wondering if pursuing such a selfish wish was even acceptable when power was supposed to be his only purpose. Ain could hardly believe what he was hearing. He asked Nydia if she was serious. She told him plainly that from this point forward, he would no longer be Nameless #1 of the Phantom Dragon Knights. Instead, he would enroll at the Royal Knight Academy as Ain. An orphan from the church, she warned him to keep a low profile because of his connection to the kingdom's darkest secrets. For Ain, this was the first wish he had ever made, and having it granted filled him with a feeling he had never known. Nydia explained that she knew the academy headmaster personally, which made it possible for a commoner like Ain to enroll with a proper recommendation. She acknowledged that his abilities could easily place him in the upper class, but she chose to put him in the lowest class regardless of his test results. Goal was to draw as little attention as possible. Ain was caught off guard at first, but then he thanked her, understanding that she was looking out for him. Nydia placed her hand gently on his head and told him he could do it, calling him her dear child once more. She said there would be many unfamiliar experiences ahead, but that she believed in him. As Ain turned to leave, Nydia told him to do his best. He responded with a firm and determined yes. She watched him walk away, reflecting quietly on the fact that he was Phantom Dragon Knight #1, her finest creation. She marveled at how closely he resembled a real human. Ain walked down the cathedral corridor, a dark energy swirling faintly around him, hinting at the power he carried beneath the surface. Behind him, Nydia watched with a mixture of curiosity and something colder. She referred to him as her beloved beast, trying to play at being human. She wondered what this experience would do to him, whether it would change anything at all. There was no telling what awaited him at the academy, and that uncertainty seemed to excite her. And so Ain arrived at the Royal Radurante Knight Academy, ready to begin the life he had wished for. A crowd of applicants gathered in front of the Grand Academy building on examination day, and the atmosphere was tense with competition. Among them, a small girl with pink hair tried to make her way through, timidly asking to be let past. But she was stopped by a blue-haired noble who mocked her recommendation letter and looked down on her for being a commoner. The girl stood her ground. Despite understanding the prejudice against her, she insisted she had every right to at least take the exam. She argued that she should not have to go home without even trying, but the noble only grew more irritated at her defiance. He sighed and lifted his hand, then ordered his follower Depp to break her arms. The girl froze in shock. She pleaded for them to stop as Depp grabbed her and pulled her forcibly. The situation was about to get worse when a cloaked figure stepped in. Ain grabbed Depp's arm and told them to stop, his voice calm, firm. Ain assessed the situation and questioned how fair it was to treat an exam candidate this way. The noble sneered at him for not knowing his place, but Ain was unfazed. He admitted plainly that he had no idea who this person was and did not care. He told them to let the girl pass, since she was a legitimate applicant with a valid recommendation. The girl, worried about dragging someone else into her trouble, tried to back down. She apologized and said she did not want Ain getting involved because of her. She offered to just go home, but the noble was not about to let it go. He was furious that a commoner had the nerve to talk back to him. The noble introduced himself as Candelra Camarison from the Camarison Marquise family. He launched into a tirade about how lineage was everything for a knight. He argued that only those born into established knight families deserved to advance, and that commoners needed to learn their place. Candelra continued to challenge Ain, threatening to teach him exactly where he stood in the hierarchy. Ain was not impressed. He noted internally that differences in strength were nothing new to him. Candelra activated mana reinforcement to enhance his body, preparing to fight. Ain watched calmly, observing the mana flowing through Candelra's body, and noticed he had also activated lightweight magic. The confrontation was about to begin. Ain read Candelra's movements carefully, noticing the attack coming from the side. He stepped back without any urgency. Candelra charged forward aggressively, throwing a punch, but Ain moved out of the way as though it were nothing. Candelra boasted about his lightweight magic, claiming he could appear behind someone in a single breath, and sneered at Ain for being an ignorant commoner. Two onlookers watched in confusion, unable to follow what was happening. Candelra taunted Ain, asking how it felt to be outclassed. But then Ain appeared behind Candelra and tapped him on the shoulder. Candelra spun around in shock. Ain pointed out that Candelra had poor control over his lightweight magic. He had failed to keep track of his surroundings and left his back completely exposed. Candelra started sweating as Ain calmly picked apart his technique. Ain told him he had not used mana reinforcement or any magic at all, and that Candelra's strategy had been full of openings from the start. Candelra was furious. He refused to accept being humiliated by a commoner and drew his sword, insisting on showing his real strength. He activated his family's technique, the 9-Fox Circle Flash, creating the illusion of multiple attacks closing in from every direction. He declared it was over and launched a high-speed thrust straight at Ain. Ain did not flinch. As Candelra closed the distance under lightweight magic, Ain kicked him square in the chin. Because lightweight magic had reduced Candelra's weight, the kick sent him flying over 10 meters through the air. His sword spun out of his hand. Candelra crashed to the ground while Ain stood exactly where he was, completely unfazed. The onlookers stared in disbelief at what they had just witnessed. Depp was the first to move, rushing to where Candelra had landed and crying out his name. Ain watched from where he stood and calmly noted the flaws in Candelra's technique. His control over lightweight magic had been sloppy, and his desperate strikes had no real foundation behind them. The kick had sent him so far precisely because the magic had made his body lighter. The girl tugged at Ain's sleeve and suggested they leave before things got worse. She thanked him for stepping in and saving her, but she looked worried, glancing at Candelra and asking if he was all right. Ain told her not to worry. He explained that Candelra had been using mana reinforcement the entire time, so a kick like that would not kill him. Candelra proved the point himself. He pulled himself up, bruised and furious, and screamed that Ain had made a grave mistake by turning him into an enemy. He swore he would remember Ain's face and make him pay for the humiliation. Once the dust settled, the girl properly introduced herself. Her name was Rurururia, and she told Ain she was safe because of him. Ain gave his name in return and admitted he felt a bit foolish for even worrying about whether he had hurt the person he kicked. They talked briefly about the academy's entrance exam and what it took to get in. Rurururia was curious about Ain's background, but he kept things vague. Then Rururia, fidgeting nervously, asked Ain if he would be her friend. The question caught him completely off guard. She immediately panicked, apologizing for being too forward and worried she had made things awkward. But Ain was not bothered at all. In fact, he was excited, though he tried to keep his composure. He told her that he would be glad to be her friend. The truth was, he had never had anyone he could call a friend before. Rururia was the first. They shook hands, and just like that, a friendship was born. In the background, Candelra, still seething with rage, muttered his vow of revenge for the humiliation he had suffered. But Ain paid him no mind. He made a quiet promise to himself. He would not let anyone ruin what he had come here to find. For the first time in his life, he was going to experience what it meant to be young, to have friends, and to live as something other than a weapon. He was determined to protect that new beginning, no matter what stood in his way. With his first friend by his side, Ain stepped into the Royal Radarante Knight Academy to face the entrance exam. Inside, he and Rururia looked out at the massive crowd and were stunned by the sheer number of applicants. Over 500 people had shown up, all competing for just 80 spots. Ain did the math and felt confident about his chances, having prepared thoroughly over the past few days. He reflected on how important it was to earn his place through his own ability, resolving to use everything he had learned for this exam. Rururia, smiling nervously beside him, admitted that she had barely practiced with a sword. She told Ain she was sure he would pass, but she was far less confident about herself. The thought of failing and being separated from him right after they had become friends upset her so much that tears started to well up. Ain was caught off guard by her reaction, and it moved him. He quietly resolved to do his best for her sake too. A bell signaled the start of the written test inside the examination hall. A proctor instructed the candidates not to touch their sheets until given permission. The test covered magic theory, alchemy, history, knight basics, and military science. Ain was confident, having crammed from books provided by Cardinal Netia. His memory training from years of service made the material easy to absorb. After the exam, Rururia could hardly contain her excitement. She told Ain she was sure she had scored around 80%. He encouraged her, and she sheepishly apologized for being too worked up. When she asked about his performance, he said casually that he had memorized everything in just a few days and had not missed a single question, though one topic about dragons had made him pause. He then mentioned offhandedly that he had seen a real dragon recently, which completely shocked Rururia. As they walked outside, the second examination was announced, a magic demonstration. Candidates had to hit a golem target from 8 meters away with 3 shots. Rururia steeled herself for the task despite her nerves. She explained to Ain that she wielded 2 magic attributes, fire and water, a rare combination that had earned her the recommendation to the academy in the first place. She described how magic drew from 8 elemental attributes, and how dual wielders were exceptionally rare, even among high nobility. Ain reflected on how impressive dual attributes were, noting that even among the Phantom Dragon Knights, such talent was uncommon. Rururia was surprised to hear there was something Ain struggled with, and he apologized for sounding like he was bragging. He admitted that he possessed only 1 magic attribute and had serious trouble controlling it properly. In his thoughts, Ain recalled that Cardinal Netia had modified his body through alchemy and forbidden magic, dramatically boosting his mana output. While the modifications gave him incredible physical strength and enhanced mana circulation, they had wrecked his ability to perform delicate magic. His mana came out in overwhelming surges that he could not fine-tune. He resolved to find a way to manage this power on his own. The magic exam got underway. Students took their turns firing at the golem. One student barely managed to hit the target on his 3rd attempt, and the examiner, Thomas, commented on the poor quality of the nobles this year. When Rururia's turn came, Thomas mentioned that he had been instructed to evaluate commoners more strictly. He told her to show her resolve. Ain encouraged her from the sidelines. Rururia gathered her her determination and cast a fire sphere, hitting the target accurately. Thomas acknowledged her solid aim and control. She followed up with a water gun and then a fire arrow, impressing Thomas with her dual attribute skill. He remarked that she was an interesting candidate with real potential. After finishing her 3 shots, Raruraya was overwhelmed with relief and nervousness. She was grateful when Thomas praised her performance, especially her fire magic. Ain reassured her, telling her he was confident she would pass. Ruraruria asked if he was up next, and Ain confirmed that his turn was coming. Before he stepped onto the field, Ruraruria pulled out a small charm and showed it to Ain excitedly. She told him it was handmade by her grandmother and offered to lend it to him, insisting it would bring him luck. Sitting under a tree, she smiled and told him to do his best, reminding him that she was cheering for him as his friend. Ain looked at her quietly. The gesture hit him harder than he expected, and his eyes started to water. Ruraruria noticed and teased him for being a crybaby, but she pressed the charm into his hand and asked him to return it afterward. Ain held it carefully, thinking to himself that this was the first gift he had ever received from a friend. Ain took his place on the training field. The crowd watched as Thomas gave the command to begin. Ain focused and summoned a dark ball, a swirling sphere of dark energy forming above his hand. His expression was intense. The onlookers murmured in surprise when they recognized the dark attribute, which was exceptionally rare. But the dark ball misfired. It missed the golem entirely and slammed into the ground, detonating in a violent explosion. The observers shielded themselves from the blast. Ain stood in the aftermath, frustrated. He had missed his target, and the lack of control was exactly the problem he had feared. He was not about to give up. He knew he needed points to pass, and even though his dark magic was immensely powerful, his precision was non-existent. He had to find a way to hit the golem without arousing too much suspicion. Thomas stared at Ain, visibly concerned about the extraordinary power on display. Dark energy swirled around Ain as he channeled even more mana. Rururia watched nervously, unsure of what was happening. Ain decided to go bigger. He prepared a special grade spell. Abyss Break and a glowing magical sigil appeared beneath his feet. Thomas was stunned by the escalation and shouted at Ain to stop, but Ain did not waver. He unleashed the spell, and the blast tore through the surrounding area, sending shockwaves across the field. Dust and debris flew in every direction as observers scrambled for cover. The golem still stood, but the ground around it had been carved into a massive crater. Ain was not done. He pointed out that the test rules allowed 3 attempts, and he still had 1 more shot. He acknowledged the chaos he had caused, but insisted he would hit the golem this time. Thomas stared at him, somewhere between terrified and exasperated. Ain told Thomas he did not want to walk away with 0 points. He said he wanted to earn his score properly on equal footing with the other candidates. Thomas looked uncomfortable. Ain pressed the point, saying he did not want to be given marks he had not earned. Thomas finally snapped, yelling at him to stop and calling him an idiot. The testing ground was wrecked. Teachers had to be called in to repair the venue, and the remaining candidates were moved to a different location. Rururia, who had been so confident in her own magic performance, sat on the ground, looking stunned by the sheer scale of what had just happened. The third and final exam was swordsmanship. The training grounds were set up with various examiners stationed at different areas. A student told Ain not to feel bad about not getting his 3rd magic shot off, and Ain appeared slightly downcast about it. But his attention quickly moved to the swordsmanship exam ahead. Rururia noticed that their assigned examiner was number 20, a tall knight with long blue hair. They watched him spar with another candidate, offering advice and encouragement. The student left exhausted but grateful. Rururia was convinced the knight had kind eyes and told Ain there was no way someone who looked like that could be a bad person. Then a familiar voice voice called out. Candelra appeared, heavily bandaged and leaning on Depp for support. He called the examiner his big brother. The knight, Kazu Kamarsan, looked surprised and asked about Candelra's injuries. Candelra blamed everything on a filthy commoner who had attacked him out of jealousy. Kazu reacted protectively, pulling Candelra close, and his expression twisted with anger. He swore he would make whoever did this pay. Candelra pointed directly at Ein and Rururia, accusing them of staining the Camerson household's name. Kazu turned toward them with a composed but sinister look. He acknowledged that they had been causing trouble for his little brother. Ein felt a chill. He remembered Rururia's earlier words about judging people by their kind eyes, and now he understood just how wrong that judgment had been. The swordsmanship exam was about to become something far more dangerous than a test. Kazu did not waste a single moment. He sneered openly at the idea of commoners standing before him in a knight academy, then leaned in close to Ein. In a whisper meant only for his ears, Kazu promised to make him regret ever picking up a sword. He vowed to leave Ein in a state where he would never dare hold a blade again. This was not an exam anymore. It was revenge for Candelra. Rururia looked worried as Kazu's menacing presence loomed over them. He radiated confidence and superiority, boasting that he would earn perfect marks regardless of the conditions. His intent was not to test them fairly, but to break them. Kazu activated a magic technique, summoning a display of power, and turned his attention toward Rururia first, grinning at the thought of intimidating her. But Ein stepped forward before she could move, calmly asking to take the exam first. Rururia called out to him anxiously. Kazu agreed with a mocking smirk, warning that accidents could happen during a swordsmanship exam and that Ein should not hold back. He drew his sword with a sinister confidence that showed no concern for Ain's safety. Ein readied himself. The two clashed swords with intensity. Kazu taunted him, suggesting he should have left when he still had the chance. Despite the swordsmanship exam officially prohibiting magic, Kazu had no intention of fighting fair. He wanted to crush Ein by any means necessary. Kazu gradually increased the pressure, acknowledging that Ein's resilience was more than he had expected. Ein held his ground, focused and composed, while Kazu arrogantly considered whether he needed to put in more effort. Rururia and the other onlookers watched with growing concern, feeling the intensity and danger escalating with every exchange. The ground cracked under the force of their blows as Kazu pushed harder. Rururia cried out Ain's name in concern, while Candelra, watching from the sidelines, cheered for his brother and sneered about the obvious gap between nobles and commoners. The two fighters locked blades in a fierce exchange. Kazu was confused. He could not understand what was happening. Ein had not moved at all under his attacks. Ein parried effortlessly and asked calmly if that was everything Kazu had. Kazu was furious. He accused Ein of being insolent and declared he would show him a power that commoners could never reach. He activated Kuma, a strength enhancement technique that flooded his muscles with mana, pushing his physical abilities far beyond normal limits. He was determined to make Ein beg for mercy. But even with Kuma active, Kazu could not overpower Ein. He was sweating, struggling, and unable to understand how a commoner was holding him off. The realization began to creep in that maybe he was the one being outmatched. He switched to Kima, a speed enhancement technique, and attacked rapidly from multiple angles. Ein defended against everything. The onlookers watched in shock and disbelief as the balance of power became clear. One observer noted the smoothness of Ain's mana circulation, recognizing that his technique was simple but devastatingly effective. Then Ein made a comment that shattered Kazu's composure. He told him that he had already seen this fighting style before from his little brother. The Kamarsan family technique of switching between Kuma and Kema had a weakness in the transition, and Ein had figured it out during his earlier encounter with Candelra, Kazu's confidence crumbled as he realized his opponent had read him completely. Ain exploited the opening. He deflected Kazu's strike at just the right angle, hitting the hilt of his sword. The impact sent Kazu's own blade snapping upward into his jaw. Kazu's eyes went wide. He could not believe what had just happened. He collapsed to the ground, the floor cracking beneath him from the force of the fall, and lost consciousness on the spot. The observers reacted with stunned silence. Ruroria covered her mouth, eyes wide with shock. Ain looked at the fallen examiner and wondered aloud if he had gone too far. Then he caught himself and decided to play innocent, putting on a nonchalant expression. A bystander demanded to know what Ain had done. Ain shrugged and said he had not done anything, suggesting the sword had simply slipped from the examiner's hand. The bystander looked doubtful, but could not prove otherwise. Candelra rushed to his brother's side, shaking him and desperately trying to wake him up. He was panicking. With Kazu unconscious, the rigged exam scores Candelra was counting on were now at risk. Another onlooker remarked that Kazu was completely out cold. Thomas arrived on the scene and took charge. He scolded Kazu for using magic against a candidate during a swordsmanship exam, where magic was explicitly prohibited. He declared the exam suspended and said he would evaluate Ain himself as a replacement examiner. Ain pushed back, arguing that it was not a legitimate score if the person evaluating him was not the one he had actually fought. Thomas looked slightly exasperated, but ultimately concluded that Ain's exam was finished. Afterward, Ain walked alongside Rururia. She thanked him for stepping up first, saying that because he had gone before her, her own exam had been handled fairly by a different proctor. Ain was quieter than usual, doubting himself. He wondered whether he had truly earned his place, or whether Cardinal Netia's behind-the-scenes arrangements had made the difference. Rururia shut that down firmly. She told him he was wrong. He had fought a dangerous opponent bravely and without backing down. She said he was like a real knight, the kind she looked up to. In a lighter moment, Ain wondered aloud what the replacement examiner for the rest of the candidates would be like. Hoping they would not be as hostile as Kazu, Rururia promised that if Ain's score was unfairly penalized, she would protest right alongside him. Then came the exam results announcement. A crowd gathered at the academy, and Ain spotted familiar faces among the nervous applicants. He and Rururia stood together, leaning on the bond they had built through everything they had faced so far. A student nearby explained the academy's class system. Students were divided into 5 classes, A through E, based on their exam results. The class placement determined everything from dormitories to career prospects after graduation. 80 students in total were admitted, 16 per class, with A class reserved for the highest-ranked nobles. Ayan noted quietly that the ranking system was partly a cover to maintain appearances for high-ranking noble families. Then, a massive golden owl descended, grabbing everyone's attention. Rururia thought its golden feathers were beautiful, but her admiration faded fast when the owl spoke. Using telepathy, it harshly announced the exam results and told anyone who had failed to leave immediately. The crowd went silent. The results appeared on a stone slab. Rururia found her name at 65th place with 151 points and was overjoyed. She was even more thrilled to discover that she and Ain were in the same class, E class. But her excitement turned to confusion when she saw Ain's ranking. He was dead last at 80th place, with only 119 points. She could not understand how someone who had performed so impressively in both the magic and swordsmanship exams could end up at the very bottom. Ain brushed it off modestly, saying he had barely passed. He told her he was just happy to be in the same class as his friends. Meanwhile, Candelra was furious. He had been placed in D class and could not accept that someone from the Camerson Marquise family had been ranked so low. He blamed his injuries from the duel with Ain for dragging down his scores. Ain expressed quiet satisfaction with his placement, saying that being with friends mattered more to him than grades. He and Rururia exchanged encouraging words, both looking forward to what lay ahead together. Elsewhere in the crowd, a frustrated student raged about being stuck in D class class, unable to accept the result. But someone had been watching Ain carefully. They had observed his performances across all 3 exams and were questioning the academy director's decisions. This mysterious observer reflected on Ain's true capabilities, hinting at deeper intrigue within the academy's administration and the hidden forces pulling the strings behind the curtain. That observer was Thomas. He had seen enough. He burst into Director Furson's office, furious about the exam results, and accused Furson of bending to noble pressure and ignoring genuine ability. Furson, a massive old man with long white hair and golden eyes, listened with a weary expression. He acknowledged the difficulty of running the academy, while nobles constantly tried to use it for their own advantage. Thomas brought up Ain specifically. He pointed out that Ain had scored perfectly on both the magic and swordsmanship exams, demonstrating advanced combat skill and special grade magic. Yet somehow, he had been placed dead last in E-class. Thomas demanded to know if this was a deliberate move to limit a commoner's success. Furson's demeanor changed. He revealed that Ain's placement was not his own decision, it was a direct order from the Taboo Witch. Thomas froze. The Taboo Witch was a figure spoken of only in whispers, a shadowy ruler who had controlled the royal family and the church for over a century, operating under countless names and disguises. Furson warned Thomas not to speak her name carelessly. He showed Thomas a letter containing high-level directives describing Ain as a precious child who must be kept inconspicuous for 3 years with the Academy's full support. Thomas stared at the letter in shock. Furson insisted they tread carefully to avoid provoking the witch. An ominous flock of crows gathered outside the Academy window, underscoring the weight of the situation. Then a knock came at the door. Ain entered, having been told a teacher summoned him to the director's office. Furson's entire bearing shifted instantly. He addressed Ain as Ain-sama, welcoming him with exaggerated warmth and deference that stunned Thomas. Furson explained that Ain's scores had been manipulated and offered to move him to a higher class, but Ain showed no interest. He said he would follow the cardinal's orders and handle any problems himself. He did not want special treatment. Furson continued to apologize, but Ain was firm. He would stay in E-class and face whatever came his way on his own terms. The new semester arrived. Ain looked up at the academy building with genuine excitement, ready to begin his life as a student. A nervous fellow student greeted him, and Ain felt the simple thrill of a new beginning. Ruria fidgeted in her academy uniform and asked Ain if she looked strange. He told her the uniform suited her, and she blushed, thanking him quietly. The E-class students gathered as their homeroom teacher called them to prepare for the move to their dormitory. Ain and Ruria realized their instructor was Thomas, the same examiner from the magic test. Ain felt relieved to have a familiar face leading them, but as Thomas gathered the students, Ain caught whispered murmurs from the group. Some were already referring to him as the witch's child, hinting at the influence behind his placement and warning each other not to cause trouble. The students walked through the academy grounds, admiring the grand buildings of the Royal Radharanti Knight Academy. Ain and Ruria marveled at the scale of it all, but the mood was cut short by a sharp remark from a girl named Helena, who scoffed at the commoners, making a fuss over buildings that were ordinary to someone of her standing. Helena introduced herself as Helena of the Hestrello household, a knight noble family. She carried herself with unmistakable superiority. She brought up Ain's dead last ranking and made it clear she did not see him as an equal. Instead, she offered to let him serve as her attendant, implying that a commoner like him needed a noble's protection to survive at the academy. Ain surprised everyone by accepting. He told Helena he wanted to make as many friends as possible at this school and that he did not mind being in a subordinate position. The approach caught both Ruria and Helena off guard. Helena laughed mockingly and called him a clever commoner, saying she would take good care of obedient ones. students. Rururia whispered to Ain that Helena had only ranked 79th, just one spot above him, making the whole display deeply ironic. The group finally arrived at their dormitory, and the excitement died instantly. The building was run down, with peeling paint, broken windows patched with tape, and no private rooms. The E-class students stared in disbelief. Thomas confirmed that this was their assigned housing, shared rooms and all. From a distance, D-class teacher Echart and his student Candelra looked on and laughed. Echart called the building a fitting home for the academy's bottom class. Candelra agreed, sneering that it was the perfect cage for bottom feeders. Helena's anger was visible on her face, the unfairness of the system hitting her harder than anyone. Thomas told the students to drop off their luggage and head to the classroom for a proper explanation. Inside the room marked E, Thomas stood at the front while the students took their seats. Helena was the first to speak up. She protested the state of their living conditions, demanding to know why a noble should have to endure shared rooms in a crumbling building. Thomas responded calmly. He told her it was the academy's rule, and if she did not like it, she could leave. He mentioned that it was not uncommon for nobles placed in E-class to resign early out of wounded pride. Helena went quiet. Leaving was not an option for her. Her family's noble status depended on her becoming a knight. Ain thought the building was perfectly fine. He had spent years sleeping in underground labyrinths and on battlefields, so a roof and walls were more than enough. Helena looked at him as if he had grown a second head. Ruria chimed in, saying her hometown had buildings older than the dormitory. She pointed out that with only 5 girls in the class, sharing a room was not much of an issue. Helena was taken aback by how unbothered they both were. Thomas moved on to explain the class point system. Dormitory assignments were not permanent. Every 6 months, the class rankings could shift based on accumulated class points, earned through lectures, written exams, and practical exercises. The class with the highest points got the best dormitory, and the rankings also affected recommendations for becoming a kingdom knight after graduation. He used magic to display the current standings. A class sat at 243 points, B class at 215, C class at 189, D class at 163, and E class at the bottom with 137. Aiden quickly realized the numbers were based on average entrance exam scores. The gap between A class and E class was enormous. Thomas admitted that in past years, the system had become a formality. The upper classes, stacked with high-ranking nobles, always stayed on top, and E-class never managed to close the gap. A student asked if change was truly impossible. Thomas shook his head. He believed that this year was different. E-class had the potential to overtake D-class if they worked together. He encouraged them directly. If they were unhappy with their situation, they should aim to surpass D-class in points. He confessed that he personally hated the way bloodline favoritism had taken over the academy, and he wanted to see real change happen from the bottom up. Thomas wrapped up the classroom discussion and told the students to prepare for practical training. Outside on the training grounds, he announced they would be doing mock battle sparring in pairs. He emphasized that the goal was to practice exchanging blows, not to knock each other out. Rururia held her practice sword nervously and asked Ain to go easy on her. He told her it was just training and she did not need to be so tense. They naturally fell in as sparring partners, comfortable with each other after everything they had been through. Then Helena marched over and declared that she would be Ain's training partner instead. She framed it as a noble's order, asserting her right to choose. Rururia pointed out that Helena might end up without a partner if she kept insisting, which only made Helena glare at her. The argument went back and forth until it was clear that the pairing situation had become a problem. Ain looked around the training ground and noticed a student sitting alone. The young man had a scar across his nose, fierce, sharp eyes, and an aura that kept everyone at a distance. No one had approached him. Ain called out to him and suggested he pair up with Helena since she still needed a partner. Helena's face went pale. She grabbed Ain's sleeve and begged him to reconsider. She whispered frantically that the student was Gillen Guilford, the wolf nobleman from the Guilford Baron family. His family was known for violence, and Gillen himself herself had a reputation as someone genuinely dangerous. She warned Ain that pairing with him could get someone killed, but Gillen had already heard. He stood up from where he had been sitting, his expression cold and hostile. He looked at Helena and remarked that he had heard she was confident in her swordsmanship. He said he would be happy to test that. His killing intent was barely concealed. Helena was terrified, clinging to Ain's arm as the reality of the pairing set in. The training session was about to take a very different turn. And so, the sparring began. Gillen stood with his sword, resting over one shoulder, his posture radiating quiet menace. Thomas watched from a distance and noted calmly that he was glad Helena had found a partner. But Helena was anything but calm. The two clashed swords with sharp precision, both fully focused, though the air between them was thick with tension. After a while, Gillen suggested they rest. He noticed his partner seemed distracted and asked what was wrong. The answer was Helena. Something about her had been bothering him. Then it happened. Helena charged forward with determination, but her expression quickly turned to shock as Gillen met her with a vicious strike. The impact was brutal. Ain watched from the side. Troubled by what he saw, he could tell that Gillen was putting far too much force into his attacks, almost as if it were deliberate. Helena looked overwhelmed, nearly in tears as blow after blow pushed her back. Ain noted the reckless power behind Gillen's strikes. Others nearby expressed concern, suggesting they follow Thomas's advice and take the injured to the infirmary, but no one wanted to leave Helena alone in that state. Without warning, a strike came aimed directly at one of them. Ain reacted instantly, stepping in and pulling his comrade to safety. He exhaled slowly afterward, a quiet acknowledgement of how close that had been. Helena protested in disbelief, insisting that Gillen had genuinely tried to kill her just now. But Gillen brushed it off, saying that accidents happened during practice and reminded her that a teacher was available in the infirmary for exactly that reason. The tension between them cracked wide open as Gillen made his feelings clear. "I don't want to get along with small fries from the inferior class," he said, his disdain unmistakable. The conflict was no longer just about sparring. It was personal. Ain confronted Gillen and told him to apologize to Helena for nearly hurting her. Helena stood nearby, visibly upset, but Gillen refused. He was defiant, citing his noble upbringing and dismissing the idea that he should ever bow to a commoner. He carried himself with unshakable arrogance. Then, Gillen proposed a challenge. He said they would settle it with a mock battle. If Ain won, Gillen would get on his knees and apologize. But if Gillen won, Ain would bow to him and obey. He framed it as a way to relieve his boredom, but the stakes were real. He taunted Ain further, calling him a small fry from the inferior class and suggesting he could always run away if he was afraid. Ain accepted. It was not what he had expected, but he was not going to back down. Rururia gasped in surprise at the decision. Helena tried to intervene, warning Ishin that backing down was still an option and that Gillen was genuinely dangerous. But Ain had already made up his mind. He understood the risk, but he would stand his ground. Helena, struggling to keep her composure, insisted that her concern was purely practical. Losing a servant would be troublesome, she said, deflecting any real emotion. The mood shifted. Gillen stated his intention to begin, and another voice nearby mentioned looking forward to the fight. Both stood opposite each other, swords drawn. Gillen asked if they should start. Ain gave his ready answer without hesitation. They set the rules and squared off. Gillen dismissed the idea that Ain could actually challenge him. The duel began with a fierce exchange of blows, swords ringing across the training ground as spectators watched in anticipation. Despite the intensity, Ain stayed composed. He found Gillen's attacks fast and powerful, but manageable. Gillen grew visibly frustrated. Nothing he threw was breaking through Ain's defense. Internally, he was forced to admit that Ain was among the strongest students he had ever faced. Determined to end it, Gillen activated physical enhancement magic, catching the onlookers off guard. But Ain did not give him the chance to settle into it. He closed the distance in an instant, shocking Gillen completely. The gap between them vanished before Gillen could react. Gillen dropped to one knee in front of Ain, struggling but refusing to give in. He insisted through gritted teeth that he had not lost yet. Ain stood calmly, considering whether to end it here. Helena watched from the sidelines, stunned, unable to process what had just happened. Ain recognized that Gillen had tried to exploit a gap using physical enhancement magic, but it had not been enough. Others debated whether the fight should be called, pointing out Ain's clear advantage. Gillen clutched his sword and swore he would block anything that came next. He was not ready to quit. The back and forth continued. Gillen could barely follow Ain's movements. Frustration boiled over, and he muttered a curse under his breath, unable to accept how quickly things had turned against him. Then something changed. A burst of red mana erupted from Gillen's body, drawing gasps from everyone nearby. He was enveloped in a fiery aura, and he declared the name of the technique, Rakshasa armor. It was the secret art of his house. The flames intensified. Gillen shouted that there was no way someone of his noble bloodline could lose to a commoner. His eyes burned with fury and pride. Ain watched steadily, unmoved by either the declaration or the heat surrounding his opponent. Gillen charged. His speed was far greater now, the flames trailing behind him as he closed in. Bystanders stumbled back from the sheer force of it. But Ain held his ground, carefully observing the new threat. During the clash, Ain noted the difficulty of the flame armor. The fire covered Gillen's entire body, making it hard to strike without getting burned and nearly impossible to maintain distance. Still, Ain did not panic. He analyzed the technique as the fight continued. Gillen, now wreathed in flames, boasted that the armor made him invulnerable and dared Ain to try to damage him. Ain said nothing. He kept watching, waiting. Then he found the opening. In one decisive strike, he broke through the Rakshasa armor with a devastating blow. Gillen was left stunned, his ultimate technique shattered. Gillen staggered, drenched in sweat, barely able to speak. He demanded to know what Ain had just done. But Ain's follow-up was swift. A powerful strike from his sword sent Gillen flying backward. The onlookers stared in disbelief. Ain stood where he was, unflinching. When someone asked what had happened, he answered simply that it was just a punch. Gillen, still reeling, could not comprehend it. His Rakshasa armor had been broken by a head-on attack from a commoner in E-class. The pride of his house technique shattered. Gillen sank to his knees in front of Ain. He admitted his defeat. Then, with difficulty, he forced out the words. He apologized, confessing that he had underestimated Ain because of his class. He tried to stand with whatever dignity he had left. Others watched from a distance, unsure what to make of the scene. Then, Gillen went further. He apologized to Helena directly, admitting that he had been taking out his frustration on her. He revealed the reason behind his hostility. It was tied to his instructor, a personal grudge connected to his father's actions. Family prejudice had poisoned his attitude toward the lower class, and he had carried that into the academy without thinking. A quieter moment followed. Gillen reflected on his time at the academy and the assumptions he had brought with him. He wrestled with feelings of inadequacy and wondered if expulsion would have been better than continuing down the wrong path. But that moment of doubt turned into something else. He realized he had been wrong to dismiss what he could learn here. Then, without warning, Gillen dropped to both knees and bowed his head before Ain. "Please, take me as your disciple," he said. The request shocked everyone. He pleaded earnestly, saying he wanted to learn and become stronger under Ain's guidance. It was a complete reversal of everything he had said and done. Ain hesitated. He was cautious, but he could see the sincerity. After a moment, he agreed, on the condition that Gillen continued his training seriously. The tension gave way to something fragile and new, a tentative bond built on respect rather than class or bloodline. Ain extended his hand toward Gillen and asked him directly if he wanted to be friends. His expression was calm and genuine. Gillen froze. Sweat appeared on his face as he processed what was happening. Birds passed overhead in the quiet moment while he stared at the outstretched hand. Then Gillen looked away, flustered, his face slightly red. He muttered that if Ain wanted that, then he did not mind mind at all. They shook hands firmly, sealing the offer. It was a small gesture, but it meant everything. Nearby, Rururia could not contain herself. She teased that the wolf nobleman was getting embarrassed, watching the whole exchange with delight. Helena chimed in cheerfully. Ain felt a quiet pride swell in his chest. He had found his third friend at the academy. Glan reacted defensively to the teasing, insisting he had only been joking and that they should not read too much into it. But it was obvious to everyone that the friendship had already taken root. Despite his protests, Gillen was happy, and so was Ain. The group walked away together across the academy grounds. Ain reflected on what he had gained, friends in this academy, and a disciple. It was a moment of genuine fulfillment. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he would not face them alone. But those challenges came sooner than expected. Somewhere deep beneath the academy, a treasure chest sat in the darkness, bats circling overhead. Two students stared at it with wide eyes, anticipating what was inside. Above ground, the grand towers of the Royal Radarantan Knight Academy rose against the sky as another day began. Footsteps echoed through the corridor. Large doors creaked open, revealing a spiral staircase descending into darkness. Inside the classroom, Owen and his classmates listened as Thomas announced that they would be doing a dungeon exercise. Ain reacted with surprise. Helena expressed disbelief that he did not know about the dungeon, located directly beneath the academy. Ruria snapped at Helena, accusing her of mocking Ain, but Helena waved it off, insisting she was just being helpful. Thomas explained the history of the dungeon. It was known as the largest in the world, a place where magic stones could be found, left behind by the monsters that inhabited it. Royalty now used it for magic experiments and to store top-secret documents, and it served as a training ground for future knights. Ain admitted he was impressed by Helena's knowledge, saying he learned something new every time they were together. Helena puffed up with pride, but Rururia warned that she ought to study harder given her grades. Thomas then told them to form groups of 4 for the exercise. Their task was to retrieve fire element magic stones from creatures called red slugs that lived in the dungeon. Rururia fondly recalled eating slugs back in her village, which made another student recoil in disgust. A brief fantasy of a red slug full-course meal followed, with someone remarking that accepting each other's food culture was a sign of true friendship. Thomas displayed the current class point standings. E-class had 139 points, but the exercise offered the chance to earn up to 80 more. The students grew excited. This was their opportunity to close the gap and keep their hopes of graduating as knights alive. Echart addressed his D-class students before the exercise, warning them not to hunt too many red slugs so that E-class, the inferior class as he called it, would be left with nothing. He wore a smug expression as he boasted about competing against the lower class alongside his students. Meanwhile, the E-class students gathered for a serious discussion. Ain quietly observed how the exercise had been set up to pit E-class directly against D-class. Thomas reminded everyone of the rules. Violence during the exercise was strictly forbidden, and breaking that rule could lead to serious consequences. The importance of fairness was stressed, with penalties threatened for any violations. Ain reflected on the setup, noting how it was designed to fuel rivalry between the classes. Rururia helped him think through the situation, remarking that the man in charge could not be trusted. Rururia recalled how she and Ain had once outsmarted Candelra. Gillen slung an arm over Ain's shoulder and insisted they team up. Ain agreed without hesitation. Rururia and Helena both asked to join, and the group came together with visible excitement. A small argument broke out over the phrasing of who was lending their power to whom, which turned into playful shouting. But it ended with all 4 of them, Ain, Gillan, Rururia, and Helena, clasping hands together, sealing their resolve as a team. Aeon encouraged everyone, expressing real optimism about what they could accomplish. Thomas handed out maps of the dungeon, but warned that cooperation between groups was forbidden. One section of the map had been left blank to prevent teams from sharing information. Some students found the map surprisingly simple. 8 groups from the 2 classes would compete against each other to find and defeat 6 red slugs, all within a 5-hour time limit. Ain thought through the constraint calmly, already planning how to use every minute. Echart's contempt for E-class was obvious, and the sanctioned unfairness was plain to see. D-class had been allowed to enter the dungeon ahead of them. Thomas confronted Echart about the early start, but Echart only mocked him. He taunted Thomas about his position and the class he had been stuck with, calling it a fitting assignment. Thomas held his composure despite the insults. The students finally entered the dungeon. Rururia expressed frustration that D-class was already inside. The underground labyrinth was unexpectedly beautiful. Glowing light from the walls cast an almost mystical atmosphere that caught the students' attention. Galan noted the unusual ambiance with a grin. Helena, burning with competitive fire, declared they would beat D-class and break their noses if they had to. Galan folded his arms and admitted he was not feeling particularly motivated, but he recognized the opportunity for growth. Determination slowly replaced their initial hesitation as the adventure began. The group moved deeper into the dungeon and discussed their strategy. One of them pointed out that even if their team defeated a red slug, other groups might have already finished theirs. They suspected some D-class students had seen the map in advance. Galan declared that he planned to use the exercise to survey the dungeon as a future training ground, unbothered by the unfairness. Ain calmly reassured his companions, saying that if they cooperated and got results, it would make good memories. The others agreed, their spirits lifting. Galan urged the group to take things seriously, telling them not to mess around. He said they could make a real statement by outperforming D-class. The team broke into a run, pushing through the dungeon corridors, together with determination on their faces. Rururia fell behind almost immediately, struggling to keep up. She apologized, explaining that her training had focused on magic back in her village, not physical ability. Helena chided her for being hopeless, though there was no real malice in it. Ain helped Rururia by pushing her back to increase her speed and advising her on how to improve her running form. The group continued forward, with Helena catching up and thanking the others while expressing concern about pacing. Someone praised Ain's abilities, noting they could push their speed even further thanks to him. Then they spotted trouble ahead. 4 goblins stood in their path. Ain's teammates called out the number and weighed their options: conserve energy or fight through. Ain and Galan decided to engage directly, not wanting to waste any more time. They charged in with swords drawn, their movements sharp and precise against the goblins, scrambling to defend themselves. The fight was over quickly. Ain and Galan dispatched the goblins with efficient swordplay. Ain reflected on whether he had used too much force. His teammate praised the result, crediting their sharp skills to all the training they had done together. As they recovered, one of them joked confidently about their ability to handle whatever came next, even surpassing D-class. But something else caught their attention. A dark, glossy magic stone sat on the ground, out of place and ominous. They examined it more closely and realized it bore curse seal characters, a spell designed to summon monsters. Surprise and confusion spread through the group as they processed what that meant. Someone had planted it here deliberately. Ian knelt beside the magic stone, studying the monster-attracting curse seal carved into its surface. He said aloud that finding something like this here was no accident. It was a trap, set by someone who knew their route. The group tensed, their eyes widened, and alarm spread across their faces as they sensed something approaching from the darkness. They were surrounded. Massive spider-like creatures emerged from every direction. Skia, shadow spiders. The sheer size of the monsters sent a wave of shock through the group. Ain identified them as dangerous creatures, the kind that could be lethal lethal even for trained knights when they attacked in numbers. One of his companions reacted in disbelief, realizing just how far above their training level these enemies were. Rururia cried out the creature's name in fear, the reality of their situation hitting her all at once. The Skia closed in, and the odds were overwhelming. Yet even in the chaos, a quieter thought surfaced. Ain recalled something someone had once told him, that dangerous situations like these were part of being young, and that the bonds made in moments of panic were the ones that lasted. The memory belonged to Cardinal Nedia, who had once pointed at him with an encouraging smile, telling him that perilous situations were simply part of youth. Ain had been confused at the time, asking what she meant, but now, standing surrounded by monsters with his friends beside him, he understood. Felt something unexpected rise in his chest, not just fear, but excitement. This was what it meant to face something together. The tension was real, the danger was real, but so was the bond holding them all in place. But there was no time to savor that feeling. The Skia lunged. Helena screamed that there was no way this was a normal exercise. Something had gone terribly wrong. Ain stayed calm, his mind already shifting from sentiment to survival. Galan stepped forward and told the girls to run, but Ruria refused. She insisted that she was not going to abandon them, no matter what. The Skia were already on top of them, leaving no time to argue. They would fight together. Galan charged into the spiders with raw aggression, striking hard and fast against multiple creatures. Ain fought alongside him, cutting through the monsters while working out a strategy. He realized they needed to deal with the source. Before hunting down whoever had set this trap, he needed to destroy the monster-attracting curse stone first. He grabbed the dark magic stone, hurled it into the air, and smashed it with the hilt of his sword. It shattered with a loud crack, and the pull drawing the Skia began to fade. But the fight was not over. Helena's sword was knocked from her hand, leaving her defenseless. She panicked as a Skia bore down on her. A shout rang out, followed by an explosion of force that drove the creature back and saved her just in time. There was barely a moment to breathe before another threat appeared. Someone called out to Helena, asking if she was all right. She managed a shaken response. But then a warning cut through the chaos. Rururia, behind you. Rururia's eyes went wide with terror as she turned to see a spider descending on her. She hit the ground, helpless, staring up at the massive creature. Nearby, Galan was locked in his own desperate fight, fending off another Skia with everything he had. At the last possible moment, Ain raced in and threw himself between Rururia and the spider. Blocking its attack with his sword, the creature recoiled. The immediate danger passed. Rururia stared at him, shaking, and whispered that if Ain had not been there, they would all already be dead. Groups stood in the aftermath, battered but alive, and the weight of how close they had come hung over all of them. The group gathered around the remains of the shattered curse stone, catching their breath. One of them asked the obvious question: why had that stone been here in the first place? They debated whether it had been brought from a deeper level or planted from outside. If it was deliberate, then whoever was responsible had known their route in advance. The suspicion fell quickly. Rururia voiced what they were all thinking. Was this Echart's doing? Another member of the group went further, accusing whoever had set the trap of trying to get them killed. Ain suggested they keep moving toward their designated area and look for more clues along the way. There was not enough information to be certain yet. He glanced at Rururia, who sat on the ground, her legs having given out beneath her. She apologized quietly, saying she had lost all strength in her legs. Ain understood. The fear had been real for all of them. Helena was the one who spoke up. She told Rururia that she had nothing to apologize for. She pointed out that Rururia and the others had stayed and fought the Skia instead of running. Rururia blushed in surprise, then stammered that she had been terrified the entire time, but had done her best to fight. The encouragement lifted her spirits. The group pulled themselves together and declared they would push forward. They motivated each other, their resolve hardening as they thought about the traps that had been set against them and who was behind it all. Ain stayed quiet, turning the situation over in his mind. How someone had planted the cursed stone, what it it meant if Echart was truly responsible, and what else might be waiting for them ahead. They pressed deeper into the dungeon, discussing the possibility of more traps on the path. Then Rururia announced that they were approaching the red slug area. Ain's instincts suddenly flared. He told everyone to stop. A figure stepped out of the shadows with a malicious smile. It was Candelra. He greeted Ain with mocking familiarity, saying he had expected them to make it this far. Candelra blamed Ain's group for his past humiliations and declared his intention to crush them. His grand declarations of revenge echoed through the dungeon corridor. Rururia spoke up with determination, reminding Candelra that Academy rules prohibited direct interference between students during the exercise. She warned that Thomas had made the consequences clear. Candelra dismissed her without a second thought, sneering that no one in the Academy would dare punish him, given his family's status. Candelra's allies emerged from the darkness and encircled Ain's group. Ain called out Candelra's cowardice for relying on numbers instead of fighting on his own. But Candelra only ordered his forces to tighten the circle, aiming to overwhelm them. The tension surged as both sides prepared for what came next. Candelra laughed and pointed out the numbers, 4 against 8. He taunted Ain's group for being exhausted from the Skya fight, but the smirk did not last. Ain moved first, engaging the D-class students with devastating speed. He struck multiple opponents with precise, powerful swordplay, dropping them before they could mount a real defense. He leaped and dodged through their counterattacks. In his mind, he noted the difficulty of holding back enough to avoid killing them. He needed more practice fighting, at less than full strength. The remaining D-class students stared in disbelief. One of them demanded to know what was happening as Ain stepped calmly through the fallen. He looked directly at Candelra, who was visibly sweating and backing away. Ain told him plainly that Candelra was the one with the grudge against him, so they should settle it between themselves. The D-class students scrambled to understand how Ain's group had survived the Skya with no serious injuries. They had planted a powerful dark attribute magic stone, a monster-attracting curse seal, and could not believe it had failed. Ain and his allies let them stew in their confusion. One of Candelra's supporters tried to dismiss the setback, but the bravado was hollow. Then Galan stood over a defeated opponent, furious about what had been done to them. Rururia unleashed a fire sphere across the battlefield, the blast of flames scattering what remained of Candelra's formation. Galan shouted for them to press the attack and finish it. The power of their teamwork was on full display despite the overwhelming odds. The numbers collapsed. Helena and Galan cut through the remaining opposition until only one was left. That final opponent protested that 3 against 1 was unfair, but Ain stepped forward and offered a proper one-on-one duel with Candelra in the spirit of knighthood. It was time to end this. The duel began. Candelra swung aggressively, but Ain read every opening. He told Candelra he was full of gaps. In one clean motion, he knocked Candelra's sword out of his hands. Candelra looked around frantically, unable to find his weapon. Galan caught the flying blade and taunted him, asking if this was what he was looking for. Ain stood over Candelra and told him it was over, but Candelra refused to accept it. He laughed and declared his confidence in lightweight magic, then bolted. He sprinted away, shouting back that Ain should not think this was finished, and vowing to repay the humiliation 100 times over in the name of the Camerson Marquise family. Ain watched him go, unimpressed. He asked a simple question. Did Candelra really think only he could use lightweight magic? It was a basic knight skill. In an instant, Ain closed the distance. Candelra's face twisted in shock as Ain caught him effortlessly and brought him down with a swift maneuver. The chase was over before it had truly begun. Ain reflected afterward that chasing Candelra had been unnecessary. Self-defense had already been established. He maintained his composure and turned back to the group. Behind him, D-class students lay scattered on the ground. The team debated what to do with them. Someone suggested leaving them where they were. Then a bag caught their attention. It was attached to Candelra. Inside were red slug magic stones stones, 6 of them. The group realized that Candelra's team had already hunted the slugs and collected the stones, meaning they had known the dungeon layout in advance. Ain admitted they were fortunate. He would have preferred not to fight the slugs at all. He paused and an idea formed. His companions turned to him, sensing something. Ain laid out his plan, and every one of them gave him their full attention. They were ready. Whatever came next, they would handle it together. The plan was simple. Find every other E-Class team in the labyrinth and share the stolen magic stones with them, and it worked. By the time Ain's group emerged from the dungeon entrance, the job was done. Ain sat under a tree outside, calmly petting a cat, while his classmates approached in high spirits. Someone who had been waiting expressed surprise and impatience at seeing them back so soon. The returning students grinned with confidence, teasing the person for underestimating how quickly they had finished. Inside, the surprise deepened. No one could believe how fast the E-Class teams had completed the exercise. Echart appeared incredulous, questioning whether the results were legitimate. The victorious group proudly presented their red slug magic stones as proof. Echart's suspicion turned to accusation. He implied that cheating was the only explanation for their unexpected success. The situation escalated as more E-Class teams arrived, one after another, each announcing their return with stones in hand. Shock and anger spread through the D-Class side. Echart struggled to maintain control as his carefully laid plans fell apart around him. Accusations of rule-breaking and luck flew back and forth, but E-Class stood firm. Ain had proposed sharing the spoils from Candelra's bag among all the E-Class teams. It was a generous act that also proved strategically brilliant, uniting the entire class and quietly undermining D-Class's perceived superiority. The act stirred resentment and disbelief from the other side as team after team from E-Class appeared victorious. Echart grew desperate. He accused E-Class of sabotage, but his charges only made him look more foolish as the E-Class students calmly stood their ground. His embarrassment turned to fury. D-Class teams returned empty-handed or with injured members, including Candelra, who was carried by Depp. The contrast was devastating. Echart's frustration finally boiled over. He lashed out physically at his own students, striking Depp and causing Candelra to fall and slam against the wall. The violence drew an immediate and stern rebuke from Thomas, who condemned the abusive behavior and emphasized proper conduct. It was a moment that laid bare the ugliness of Echart's character. A teacher punishing his own students for a failure he had engineered himself. Thomas declared the exercise over and told everyone to return to class immediately. Echart seethed, accusing Thomas of humiliating him with a petty trick and warning that he would make them all regret it. He addressed the E-Class students as inferior class and made his contempt unmistakable. Back in the classroom, Thomas stood at the front and announced the results. Every E-Class team had brought back a red slug magic stone, and no one had suffered fatal injuries. He clapped and congratulated the students. The class erupted in celebration as Thomas displayed the updated class points. E-Class now stood at 208 points. D-Class had only 173. The gap had reversed completely. E-Class had overtaken them, and the students could hardly believe it. The excitement turned to discussion about what the points meant going forward. Helena asked about potential dormitory upgrades, and Thomas explained that changes to housing assignments happened at the end of half years or school years, not immediately. Still, the mood was light and hopeful. The students felt a genuine sense of accomplishment. One student thanked the group for the teamwork that had helped them push back against D-Class harassment. Another expressed gratitude to Ain specifically, saying that recent events had brought real change and newfound hope to E-Class. Ain looked touched, quietly taking in the appreciation. As evening settled over the dormitory, Ain and Gilan walked together. Gilan noticed something was on Ain's mind and asked about it. Ain admitted that being appreciated like this was a new experience for him. It was the first time he had felt truly valued by others. They decided to head to the dining room together, their conversation turning to food. Then a scream shattered the calm. It was Helena's voice, and it came from the dining hall. They rushed toward the sound, hearts pounding, only to find an amusing scene. Helena, comically frightened by something harmless, being reassured by her friend. Rururia stood nearby with a proud grin, revealing that she had prepared a surprise for everyone. The tension melted into curiosity as the group wondered what she had in store. Rururia presented a large platter of food with unmistakable pride, announcing that it was her village specialty, slug cuisine. The group stared at the dish in stunned silence. The unusual appearance left everyone visibly confused and taken aback. Rururia explained that she had learned the recipe from her mother back home and had prepared it as a celebration after the dungeon exercise. She added with a hint of disappointment that she wished she could have made more for the entire class. The group stood around the table, contemplating the spread of slug dishes. Despite their reservations, no one wanted to reject the gesture. One by one, they awkwardly agreed to eat, swayed by Rururia's obvious enthusiasm and effort. Ein struggled internally, reflecting that this might be one of the most difficult moments of his life. Meanwhile, Rururia watched the table with barely contained excitement, thrilled that her friends would share in the meal. The next morning told the story. Thomas walked into the classroom to find students scattered in various states of distress, disheveled, pale, and clearly unwell. He exclaimed in shock, asking what had happened. The students could barely respond, expressing confusion and regret. One muttered that he felt as though he had lost something precious. Another let out a groan and called the experience a cultural exchange, hinting at the miserable aftermath. Still, someone acknowledged that Ruraria's mother's recipe was at least supposed to be healthy, which did little to ease the suffering. Then the door burst open. Echart strode into the classroom with a sinister expression, drawing every eye in the room. He confronted Thomas directly, addressing him by name and declaring his intention to expose what he called the crimes of the inferior class. He spoke with open disdain, mocking the students for their low-born backgrounds and lack of noble standing. Thomas demanded proof. Echart dismissed the question with a condescending wave, maintaining his air of superiority. He surveyed the room and began calling out names one by one: Gilan, Rururia, Helena, and Ein. He accused them of conspiring against D-Class during the labyrinth exercise and declared that all four of them would be expelled. The classroom fell silent. The students stared back at Echart with expressions of shock and disbelief, the threat of expulsion hanging over them like a blade.